TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donation. Shalom ve'erev tov, good evening. Welcome to our daily TV7 Israel News Bulletin, broadcast from Jerusalem. Israel commemorates the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust. The Trump administration reiterates its determination to frustrate Iran's aspirations to attain nuclear weapons. And China urges the United States and Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. As sirens sound in northern Israel, warning Israeli civilians to rush to bomb shelters, a separate siren sounded across the country this morning, commemorating the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust of World War II, with a small, intimate gathering of Israel's leaders, including President Yitzhak Herzog, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Parliament Speaker Amir Ohana, and Supreme Court President Yitzhak Amit, laying wreaths at Yad Vashem's Holocaust Memorial Museum. The evening prior, Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed a separate torch-lighting ceremony by 6 Holocaust survivors, during the course of which he highlighted the vital importance of the rebirth of the State of Israel for the guarantee of the survivability of the Jewish people.
To
the Holocaust survivors, those of mighty spirits, we all embrace you with love. And tonight, we all salute those who light the torches of commemoration and heroism here at Yad Vashem. The survivors, who defeated the Holocaust, were fortunate to see the rebirth of Israel, and they contributed to it. But now, they have the privilege to witness something else of unparalleled importance. In the Holocaust, the poet Yuri V. Greenberg wrote, "We were an extinct people like a wild beast in a hunt." In contrast, today our people fight back against our oppressors. During the Holocaust, we were an abused animal crying in agony. Today, however, we have a state which is stronger than ever, which roars with power.
The Israeli Prime Minister continued by asking a frequently asked question of what if, vis-a-vis the past European approach to the then Nazi-controlled Germany, among others.
במבט לאחור על השואה, מתעוררת במלוא חריפותה השאלה.
Looking back at the Holocaust, the question what if arises in all its bluntness. What if we had a state before the catastrophe? What if the nations of Europe had stopped the monstrous Nazism in time instead of appeasing it? What if the Allies had bombed the extermination camps? But, my dear friends, there are no what-ifs in history. The terrible disaster happened. The nightmare scenario came true. The world was plunged into a war of destruction that claimed the lives of tens of millions, and of course, our 6 million brothers and sisters. That same world, which was indifferent to the persecution of the Jews, realized that the hatred of Jews, the poisonous anti-Semitism, undermines the foundations of human society as a whole. Given all this, we are acting so that future generations will not ask what if, with a sense of missed opportunity. The answers are being given right now.
Prime Minister Netanyahu further decreed never again is relevant today more than ever, and that the nation of Israel has learned its lessons from the Holocaust.
Our nation has learned the lesson. Year after year I stand here. I have pledged at the Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony, we will not allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. And as Prime Minister of Israel, I have promised there will not be a second Holocaust. This year, we turned that promise into reality. We dealt the regime of terror in Iran the hardest blow in its history. The regime is weaker than ever. Most of its military assets are gone.
Earlier in Washington, U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the collapse of negotiations with Iran, stressing that the naval blockade aims to force Iran to capitulate to America's demands as the terror regime in Tehran continues to block the Strait of Hormuz in defiance of international laws and norms. Moreover, President Trump noted that the Iranians, in their desperation, have already reached out to his team and that they are very keen on reaching a deal. On that, President Trump stressed unequivocally that the Ayatollah regime would never attain nuclear weapons.
We can't let a country blackmail or extort the world, because that's what they're doing. They're really blackmailing the world. We're not going to let that happen. I can tell you that we've been called by the other side. They'd like to make a deal very badly, very badly. They will never have a nuclear weapon. Iran, you marking it down? Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And we agreed to a lot of things, but they didn't agree to that. And I think they will agree to it. I'm almost sure of it. In fact, I am sure of it. If they don't agree, there's no deal. There'll never be a deal. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to get the dust back. We'll get it back either. We'll get it back from them or we'll take it.
In a subsequent special exclusive interview for Fox News, a special report with Brett Barr, Vice President J.D. Vance insisted that the so-called bull is now in the court of the Iranians.
I think it was the first time that you had ever seen the Iranian government, the U.S. government meet at such a high level, maybe in the history of the current leadership of Iran. So that's, I think, a positive. And again, we did make some progress in the negotiation. The big question from here on out is whether the Iranians will have enough flexibility, whether the Iranians will accept the critical things that we need to see in order for things to get done. Whether we have further conversations, whether we ultimately get to a deal, I really think the ball is in the Iranian court because we put a lot on the table. We actually made very clear what our red lines were. We also made clear, Brett, that we actually would be very happy. The President of the United States has said he would be very happy if Iran was treated like a normal country, if it had a normal economy, if its people were able to prosper and thrive. But in order for Iran to be a normal country economically, it's going to have to be a normal country from the perspective of not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it's going to have to be a normal country from not pursuing terrorism. And so there really is, I think, a grand deal to be had here, but it's up to the Iranians, I think, to take the next step.
Vice President Vance continued by stressing that the United States expects the Islamic Republic to open the Strait of Hormuz, that after the RGC seemingly miscalculated America's determined position.
We need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiation saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. We have seen, as the president has said, some significant uptick in traffic coming through the Straits of Hormuz. That's good for the global economy.
Meanwhile, in London, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a soon-to-be-held summit with French President Emmanuel Macron, among other European leaders, to discuss the opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
I can confirm today that together with President Macron, I will convene a summit of leaders this week to drive forward the international effort we have built in recent weeks, bringing together dozens of countries to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The summit will be focused on two things. First, diplomatic efforts to bring pressure to bear for a negotiated end to the conflict and for the strait to be opened. Second, military planning to provide assurance to shipping as soon as a stable environment can be established. And let me be very clear, this is about safeguarding shipping and supporting freedom of navigation once the conflict ends.
The British Prime Minister continued by stressing that Britain would not stand by the United States in enforcing the naval blockade against the Islamic Republic.
In relation to the blockade, let me be clear, as I've been already in the last day or so, that we are focusing our efforts on opening in full the Strait of Hormuz because of the damage it's doing to economies around the world, including our own economy. That is why we've been working with other countries at various levels, and we'll bring them together in a summit later this week. And we, the UK, will not be joining the blockade that the President announced.
It is worth noting that according to assessments, Iran is set to sustain losses of roughly $435 million a day with the most significant losses outside of Iran expected to impact China. Consequently, China has called on both the United States and Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz.
China urges all parties to abide by the ceasefire arrangement, focus on the general direction of dialogue and negotiations, and take concrete actions to promote the easing of the regional situation and restore normal passage through the strait at the earliest possible time.
It is important to highlight that China is heavily reliant on energy products transiting the Strait of Hormuz, importing roughly 5.5 million barrels per day of crude oil, which represents about 45 to 49% of China's total crude oil imports, alongside roughly 19.4 million metric tons of liquid natural gas, or LNG, which represents approximately 30% of China's total LNG imports.
Since the outbreak of the conflict in Iran, fuel prices have surged sharply and remained at elevated levels, while the cost of oil transportation has risen significantly. These factors are being transmitted through supply chains, pushing up the cost of global commodity production and transportation. Global goods trade is expected to see a significant decline. The World Trade Organization's latest Global Trade Outlook and Statistics has substantially revised downward its forecast for the growth rate of global goods trade volume.
Meanwhile, in China, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who has been promoting anti-American and anti-Israeli policies, is currently visiting Beijing for meetings with President Xi Jinping, during the course of which he urged the Chinese Communist Party to take a more active role in Europe, while claiming further that only China could resolve the situation in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz.
I find it very difficult to imagine any other interlocutors, apart from China, that could resolve this situation in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. I had the opportunity to discuss with President Xi the reforms our multilateral system needs in order to better reflect the multipolar reality of today's world. We also discussed the serious situation in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iran, in the Strait of Hormuz, and undoubtedly in Ukraine as well. And, from Spain's perspective, we encouraged the Chinese government to continue contributing actively to strengthening that multilateral system and to what experts refer to as the provision of global public goods.
Y a eso que los expertos llaman la provisión de bienes públicos globales.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News, which is made possible by the generosity of our viewers. If you would like to help support TV7 Israel, which is exclusively donation-based, you can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and redemption of Israel. I'm Jonathan Essen, wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, until our next update, Shalom from Jerusalem.